I bought my father a NA test for his 60th birthday. 3 months later, the results said he wasn't my father. My mother started crying before I even finished the sentence. But that wasn't the part that changed my life. The part that changed my life was what my father said next. He looked at the screen, looked at me, and calmly said, "I know." Not "I think," not "there must be a mistake." I know. Then he told me he'd known the truth for 35 years. What I didn't know yet was that the NOT test wasn't my idea. My father had planned the whole thing. And the reason why would leave me sitting alone at 3 a.m, reading a letter through tears I couldn't stop. Before we begin, please now get comfortable, because this story isn't about biology, it's about the man who chose to stay. My name is Nathan Cole. At least, that's the name I've always carried. I was 34 years old when everything happened. I lived in Portland, Oregon, where rain was less a weather pattern and more a personality trait. I worked as a civil engineer for a company called Meridian Group. The work suited. I liked structure, I liked certainty, I liked knowing that if a bridge failed, there was a reason. Everything could be measured, everything could be explained. Life, I believed, worked the same way. I was wrong. Most weekdays followed the same rhythm. Coffee, traffic, blueprints, meetings, deadlines, the kind of routine that becomes invisible because you've repeated it so many times. Looking back, I sometimes envy that version of myself. The version that thought he knew where he came from. The version that believed foundations stayed where you built them. My father, Robert Cole, turned 60 in October. If you asked people to describe him, you'd hear the same word over and over again. Reliable, not charismatic, not flashy, not particularly emotional. Reliable, Robert Cole was the kind of man who showed up. That sounds simple until you realize how many people don't. When I was 7 years old, I played a triangle in a school concert. One note. One single note. My father sat through nearly 3 hours of children singing off key just to hear it. When I was 16 and crashed my first car into a mailbox, he arrived before the tow truck. When my mother had emergency surgery at 2 a.m, he spent the entire night in a hospital chair pretending to read a paperback he never got past page 32. He showed up. Again and again and again. As a kid, I thought that was normal. As an adult, I realized it was extraordinary. His birthday dinner was small, family only. That's how he liked things. No rented venue, no speeches, no giant guest lists. Just people he cared about. I cooked dinner, braised short ribs, his favorite. The same recipe we'd been tweaking together for years. My mother baked a cake, my aunt brought wine. The evening felt easy, comfortable, ordinary. Nobody knew they were sitting inside the final chapter of a secret that had started 35 years earlier. After dinner, I handed him an envelope. "Happy birthday." He smiled, opened, looked inside. A not ancestry kit. I expected curiosity, maybe excitement. Instead, something crossed his face. A shadow. Gone almost immediately. If I had blinked, I would have missed it. "Interesting," he said. Then he slipped the envelope into his pocket. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Months later, I would replay that moment 100 times, trying to figure out exactly when my father realized the clock had finally run out. The results arrived 11 weeks later. I remember because it was a Tuesday, and because ordinary Tuesdays should not be allowed to destroy entire versions of your life. I was eating leftover soup at my kitchen counter when the notification appeared on my phone. Not results ready. I opened the app. Scandinavian and Northern European ancestry. Nothing surprising. Then I clicked family matches. My father's profile appeared. Under relationship prediction, there was one word. Unrelated. I stared at it, then refreshed the page. Unrelated. I closed the app, opened it again. Unrelated. The word remained exactly where it was. Cold, certain, impossible. For 20 minutes, I sat there staring at my phone while my soup went cold, trying to force reality into becoming something else. Reality refused. I called my mother. Not my father, my mother. To this day, I don't know why. Maybe some part of me already knew where the answer lived. She answered on the third ring. "Hey, sweetheart." Normal voice, normal tone, normal Tuesday. The Dina results came back. Silence, tiny, barely noticeable. But there. Then she said, "Oh," and suddenly something inside me knew. Not logically. Instinctively, the same way engineers sometimes know a structure is failing before they understand exactly why. It says Dad isn't my father. The silence that followed wasn't confusion. It wasn't surprise. It was recognition. The silence of someone hearing a knock they've been expecting for decades. Mom, Nathan, tell me. I heard her breathe. Then it happened a long time ago. I closed my eyes. It was only once. Everything after that blurred together. The explanations, the excuses, the apologies. I don't remember them. What I remember is staring at my hands. Hands I'd spent 34 years believing came from my father. Suddenly they seemed to belong to a stranger. Or so I thought. The next morning I drove to my parents' house. 2 hours. No podcasts, no phone calls, just silence. The kind that eventually becomes its own sound. My mother was waiting in the kitchen. She looked like she hadn't slept. Nathan, where's Dad? She swallowed. In the garage. I walked straight through the house. Past the hallway. Past the laundry room. Out to the garage. My father was standing at his workbench sorting bolts into plastic containers. A completely ordinary, and somehow that made everything worse. He looked up, saw my face, and immediately understood why I was there. He set the bolt down carefully, then said, "You saw the results." Yes, a long silence. Then, "I know." I stared at him. "What?" "I know." The same calm voice he'd used, teaching me how to drive, teaching me how to fish, teaching me how to fix things around the house. I've always known. For a second, I genuinely thought I might be sick. How long? Since before you were born. My legs gave out. I sat down on an old wooden crate. Dad, he looked away. And for the first time in my life, I saw pain in his eyes. Not fresh pain, old pain, the kind that's lived somewhere so long it becomes part of the furniture. "I found a letter," he said quietly, "before you were born." I couldn't speak. He continued. "I learned the truth 3 months before the day you arrived." I stared at him, trying to understand, trying to catch up, trying to figure out what kind of man carries something like that for 35 years. Then another question hit me. A worse one. "If you've known all this time," my voice cracked, "why did you take the test?" For the first time that morning, my father looked away. The silence lasted so long, it became its own answer. Finally, he said, "I'll explain later." I frowned. "What does that mean?" His jaw tightened. "There's something you need to read first." At the time, I thought discovering the truth was the hardest part. It wasn't. The hardest part was still waiting for me. For the next 12 days, that answer followed me everywhere. To work, to the grocery store, to the gym, into my sleep. If he'd known the truth for 35 years, why agree to a DNA test now? Why willingly open a door he'd spent decades keeping closed? The question became an obsession, and my father refused to answer it. Life continued because life always does. Projects still had deadlines, clients still wanted answers, meetings still filled my calendar. But I moved through all of it like a man walking through fog. People spoke to me. I responded. Work got done, emails got sent. From the outside, everything looked normal. Inside, nothing was. For 34 years, I'd believed my life was a completed puzzle. Now it felt like someone had flipped the box over and shown me half the pieces belonged to a different picture. My mother called several times. I didn't answer. She left voicemails, long ones. I listened to every single message, then deleted them. Not because I hated her, because I didn't know what to do with what she'd given me. Anger would have been easier. Anger is simple. Confusion is exhausting, and I was exhausted. 12 days after our conversation in the garage, my father called. "Can you come by this weekend?" His voice sounded different. Not weak, just tired. A tiredness I couldn't quite place. "Sure," a pause. Then he said, "There's something I should have given you a long time ago. When I arrived, my mother wasn't there. My father had arranged that. He met me at the front door. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he led me into the living room. A manila envelope sat on the coffee table. Waiting, I looked at it. Then at him. What is it?" He lowered himself into his chair. The answer. My stomach tightened. The answer to what? A sad smile touched his face. Everything. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then he said something I wasn't expecting. "I have prostate cancer." The room suddenly felt smaller. I stared at him. "What?" He nodded, slow moving. The words sounded rehearsed, like he'd practiced saying them. "The doctors are optimistic." I kept staring. He gave a small shrug. "The good news is that men my age get this all the time." I still didn't laugh. Neither did he. The silence stretched between us. Finally, he looked down at the envelope. I found out 6 months ago. Another pause. And for the first time in a very long time, his voice softened. I had to think about the possibility that I might not always be here. Something tightened in my chest. I realized there were things you deserve to know. He pushed the envelope across the table. I just didn't know how to say them. I picked it up. 4 handwritten pages. The same handwriting that had signed permission slips. Birthday cards. Report cards. The check for my first car. The handwriting of my father, whether biology agreed or not. I unfolded the first page and started reading. Nathan, if you're reading this, then we finally arrived at the conversation I spent 35 years avoiding. Not because I didn't trust you, because I was afraid. You deserve honesty about that. I found out 3 months before you were born. I found a letter. Your mother never meant for me to see it, but I did. And once you know something, you can't unknow it. For 2 weeks, I was furious. Furious enough to leave. Furious enough to destroy everything. I drove around for hours. I barely slept. I imagined different futures. Some of them involved walking away. I want you to know that, because pretending otherwise would make me look better than I was. And that's not what this letter is for. The truth is, I wasn't noble. I was hurt. I was angry. I was jealous of a man I'd never met. I hated what had happened. And for a while, I hated what it had done to my future. Then you were born. And everything changed. The first time I saw you, I realized something important. You weren't responsible for any of it. You hadn't lied. You hadn't betrayed anyone. You hadn't asked to be part of a mess created by adults. You were just a baby. 7 pounds. Red-faced. Angry at the smallest innocent person I'd ever seen. And standing there in that hospital room, I had a choice. Leave or stay. I wish I could tell you I made that choice immediately. I didn't. I stood there looking at you for a very long time. Long enough for a nurse to ask if I was okay. Long enough for me to realize I was standing at the edge of 2 entirely different lives. One life was easier. One life was hard. I chose the harder one. Not because I was brave. Because when I looked at you, leaving felt impossible. The strange thing about choices is that people think you make them once. You don't. The important choices have to be made over and over again, every day. For 35 years, I kept making the same choice. Stay when things were good. Stay when things were hard. Stay when I was angry. Stay when I was tired. Stay when nobody would have blamed me for leaving. Stay, eventually, it stopped feeling like a choice. It became my life. And somewhere along the way, you became my son. Not in theory, not legally, not biologically, in every way that actually mattered. I paused. The words blurred. For several seconds, I couldn't continue reading. Across the room, my father sat quietly, not speaking, not interrupting, just the way he'd waited my entire life. I took a breath, turned the page, and reached the part that changed everything. I turned the page and kept reading. People spend a lot of time talking about blood. Bloodlines, blood relatives, blood ties, as if blood is what builds a family. I've had 35 years to think about that. And I've come to a different conclusion. Blood can create a child. But it can't. Blood doesn't sit through school plays. Blood doesn't teach someone to drive. Blood doesn't lose sleep worrying about report cards. Blood doesn't wait in emergency rooms. Blood doesn't answer phone calls at 2 a.m. People do. Another man may have helped create you, but I was the one who stayed. Biology made you possible. Choice made you mine. I know those words sound dramatic, but after 35 years, I think truth earns the right to be dramatic once in a while. I smiled despite myself. That sounded exactly like him. Dry, understated, a little awkward, completely sincere. The letter continued. I want to tell you what I know about you. Not because we're related, because I've spent 34 years paying attention. You notice when things are off level. You always have. Even as you'd walk past a crooked picture frame and straighten it without saying a word. You thought nobody noticed. I did. Every time. You have patience. Real patience. The kind that spends all day making stock. The kind that revises a project one more time because good enough isn't good enough. You show up. That's the thing I'm proudest of. Not your salary, not your career, not your accomplishment. Just that when people need you, you're there. I hope you learned some of that from me. because it was the only thing I ever truly knew how to teach. By the time I reached the bottom of the page, I couldn't see clearly anymore. I wiped my eyes, took a breath, then turned to the final page. The apology came first. Not for choosing me, never for that, for waiting. Nathan, I owe you an apology, not for staying. I would make that choice again 1,000 times. I owe you an apology for waiting so long to tell you, for allowing you to live with half the picture because I was afraid of what the full picture might cost. I told myself I was protecting you. Partly that was true, but if I'm being honest, I was protecting myself too, from this conversation, from your questions, from seeing disappointment in your eye. That fear belonged to me, not you, and you deserved better. I stopped, looked up. My father sat quietly across the room, hands folded, eyes lowered. Waiting, I looked back down at the page. The biological fact is what it is. It happened before you existed. It has nothing to do with your worth, nothing to do with your character, nothing to do with the man you've become. What I need you to understand is this. You were never second place. You were never a compromise. You were never an obligation. You were my son from the moment I decided you were, and I have never regretted that decision. Not once. Not for a single day. My throat tightened. I thought that was the end. It wasn't. At the very bottom of the page, squeezed into the corner, was one final handwritten, a single sentence. A sentence so unexpected it took several seconds to register. I bought the Dina kit. I blinked, then read it again. I bought the Dina kit. For a moment, I genuinely thought I'd misunderstood. I looked up. My father nodded, slowly, almost sadly. Yeah, the room seemed to tilt. What? My voice barely worked. You bought it? He nodded. A week before your birthday. I stared, trying to process what he just said. The envelope, the gift, the idea, the test. Everything my father had planned it. Why? The word came out sharper than I intended. His expression softened, and suddenly he looked older than 60. Not physically, emotionally, like a man who'd been carrying something for too long. I found out I was sick. I already knew that part. But he continued anyway, and for the first time, his voice dropped. For the first time, I had to think about what would happen if I wasn't here. The room became very quiet. If the truth came out after I died, he paused. You'd have questions nobody could answer. My chest tightened. I couldn't leave you that. He looked down at his hands. I didn't want you learning the truth from paperwork. A pause. Or from a stranger. Another pause. Or standing at my funeral, wondering who your father really was. Something broke inside me. Not in a bad way, in the way ice breaks when winter finally ends. My father looked directly at me. I wasn't trying to expose your mother. His voice was calm. I wasn't trying to punish anyone. Another pause. I just didn't want my son carrying unanswered questions after I was gone. My son. Not because he had to say it. Because he wanted to. For 35 years, he'd carried a secret. And somehow, even now, his biggest concern wasn't himself. It was me. I looked down at the letter. Then around the room. The same room where I'd opened Christmas presents. Done homework. Watched football games. Celebrated birthdays. Every memory suddenly looked different. Not fake. Stronger. Because now I understood something I hadn't understood before. None of it had been automatic. Every school play, every fishing trip, every lecture, every hug, every ride home, every late night conversation, every single one of them had been a choice. Thousands and thousands of choices, made one day at a time. And for the first time in my life, I understood how much those choices had cost him. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Eventually, my father stood up, walked into the kitchen, and started making coffee, the same way he'd made coffee every morning for as long as I could remember. Water, filter, grounds, routine. I sat there listening to the familiar sounds and suddenly understood something. The biggest acts of love rarely look important while they're happening. Nobody sees a father making coffee and thinks, this is sacrifice. Nobody sees someone showing up year after year and thinks, this is devotion. Not in the moment. Only later. Only when you realize they didn't have to. Only when you realize how easily they could have walked away. 3 weeks later, I finally drove back to my parents' house. My mother opened the door. and immediately knew this wasn't a social visit. She looked nervous, the kind of nervous that comes from carrying a question for a long time and finally realizing the answer has arrived. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd eaten thousands of meals growing up, the same table where she'd packed school lunches, signed report cards, helped me with homework. Now it felt unfamiliar, as though the room itself knew something had changed. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then I placed the letter on the table. I read it. She looked down at the envelope and didn't touch it. He knew. The words landed heavily between us. Her eyes closed, slowly, painfully, as if she'd spent 35 years hoping she'd never hear them. He knew before I was born. Tears appeared almost immediately, but I wasn't finished. Do you know what hurts the most? She looked up, expecting anger, expecting accusations, expecting punishment. Instead, I said, not the affair. Silence, not even the lie, more silence. What hurts is that he carried it alone. Her face collapsed, and for the first time since all of this started, I saw something beyond guilt. I saw understanding, the kind that arrives years too late. He protected me. I said quietly, he protected you. My voice remained calm, almost gentle, and nobody protected him. The kitchen went silent. My mother covered her mouth. Tears rolled down her face. He spent 35 years carrying the consequences of a decision he didn't make. I looked toward the window. He paid for something he never did. Another pause. And somehow, my throat tightened. And somehow, he still became the best father I've ever known. My mother cried. Not dramatically, not loudly, just quietly. The way people cry when excuses stop working. Finally, she whispered, "He's a better man than I deserved." I nodded. Yeah, my voice softened. He is. A few minutes later, I stood to leave. She looked surprised. That's it? I paused by the doorway. Then, nodded. For now. Nathan, I turned back. For the first time in weeks, I saw hope in her eyes. Small, fragile, but there. I'm not cutting you out of my life, I said, but some things take time. She nodded, crying again. This time with relief, I left and drove home. The strange thing about healing is that it doesn't arrive all at once. There isn't a moment where everything suddenly makes sense. There isn't a magical conversation that repairs 35 years. There are only small steps. One after another. Months passed. Spring turned into summer. Summer drifted toward fall. My father's cancer remained stable. Not cured, not gone. Stable, I learned to appreciate words like that. Stable, manageable, monitoring, words that weren't promises, but weren't hopeless either. During those months, my father and I spent more time together than we ever had before. We cooked, we talked, we fixed things. We sat on porches. Sometimes we discussed serious topics. Most of the time we didn't, because eventually I realized something important. The letter wasn't the most valuable thing he'd given me. The 34 years before the letter were. The letter simply helped me understand them. One Saturday in June, we made short ribs together. The same recipe we'd been arguing over for 15 years. He insisted the meat needed another 20 minutes. I insisted it didn't. He won. As usual. Halfway through dinner, I caught myself laughing. Really laughing. The kind that sneaks up on you. My father smiled, and for a moment, everything felt normal again. Not the old normal. A new one. Built on truth instead of silence. That September, I changed my email signature. Not my last name, I considered it. Seriously, longer than I'd like to admit. But in the end, it never felt right. Cole was my name. It had always been my name, not because of genetics, because a man named Robert Cole had spent 34 years earning the right to pass it down. No test result could change that. Instead, I added a single line beneath my name. A quote. Something my father had said years earlier while mounting a shelf in the garage. Level things tend to hold. R. Cole, I looked at the screen and smiled. It felt right. The following month, my mother called. Your father's birthday is next week. I smiled before she even finished. I'll cook. The short ribs? The short ribs. There was a pause. Then she said quietly, "Thank you." I knew what she meant. Not for dinner, for coming back. For not letting one truth erase every other truth. The morning of my father's 61st birthday, I drove toward Bend before sunrise. The highway was nearly empty. Mount Hood stood against the horizon. Massive, silent, unmoved, I thought about the Dina test, the percentages, the algorithms, the family matching screen, that single word. Unrelated, what a small word. What an incomplete word. A machine had looked at chromosomes and decided there was no relationship. Maybe biologically it was right. But life isn't lived inside a laboratory. Life happens in kitchens, hospital waiting rooms, school auditoriums, cold garages, long drives home. That's where family is built. That's where fathers become fathers. When I pulled into the driveway, my father was standing on the porch, waiting exactly the way he'd waited my entire life. Not anxiously, not dramatically, just there. Present, reliable, steady, the way he'd always been. I got out of the car, he raised a hand, I raised one back. And in that moment, I finally understood something no NA test could ever measure. Being related isn't about who helped create you, it's about who keeps choosing you when they don't have to. Who stays, who shows up, who remains, day after day, year after year, without applause, without recognition, without certainty they'll ever be thanked. 35 years earlier, a man found a letter hidden inside a book and faced a choice, leave or stay. He chose stay. Then he made the same choice again the next day, and the next, and the next, for 35 years. Quietly, without telling anyone, without asking for credit, just showing up the way he always had. Some truths arrive like demolition. They tear down walls you thought were permanent. But sometimes, when the dust settles, you discover the foundation was stronger than you ever imagined. For 34 years, I thought my foundation was blood. I was wrong. It was a man standing on a porch, waiting, and that, I realized, was what family had meant all along. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to tell us why, and if there's someone in your life who showed up for you when they didn't have to, share this video with them. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Do Revenge, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.